You know that I believe in the perfect storm theory of crisis, which basically says that it takes three smaller storms to converge in order to create a true crisis. And so what we saw this week, many people have been focused on our political division, our partisan two-party system. That gets a lot of the attention. And then a lot of the blame has fallen on the media, and specifically social media. But in the perfect storm theory, you have to have a third something to trigger a real crisis. And I want to propose to you today that that third thing is something in the realm of the unseen. Does that make sense? So far? Okay. I just want to make sure everybody's on the understands where I'm coming from with this perfect storm thing. So in every area of life where there is conflict, people, no matter what their perspective is, I hear them allude to something or blame something or point to something that the other side, whatever the other side of an issue is, sees as invisible. It's not clear to other people what you're talking about. So for my liberal friends, they often will point to race. And so people who can't see race, for whom systemic racism is invisible, when liberals talk about systemic racism, it's very confusing. Like, why do you keep blaming that? And actually that happened this week. People kept saying, oh, but look at pictures of Black Lives Matter and how they responded to that. But for those who are not coming from that perspective, it just seems like you are constantly referencing something that to them is invisible or unseen. For my leftist friends, they're always appealing to ideology and propaganda, alienation, words like that. They're constantly blaming. So they would look at the issue, this crisis of the past week, and they will blame it on ideology, that there's a belief system behind those who stormed the Capitol. For my super religious friends, they will often look to the unseen forces in spiritual realms. They might call it the demonic. And so they'll call it a spirit of the age, or sometimes they'll even personify it as the devil or Satan. And so that's an unseen realm. And if you don't buy into that worldview, it can be very like, where are you coming from with this? Why are you introducing something that doesn't seem to be the main issue? And when we look at those on the right, one of the things that they have really bought into, that for those of us who aren't part of that world, is there's a conspiracy theory, or a set of conspiracy theories, that are motivating them behind the scenes. To those of us that don't subscribe to conspiracy theories, we hear what they're saying and we just go, where are you getting this? What are you even talking about? But one of the interesting things about where I come from and the fact that I have migrated both theologically and socially as far as I have, is that I still have friends in all of these different camps. And so when I hear people talk, I'm often aware that they try and put the real blame, or they try and, let's say, explain what's fueling this behind the scenes. And they often allude to something that is invisible to those who are not previously converted to it. So if you're not already a believer, let's say in systemic racism, when somebody alludes to racism, you just go, why do you keep bringing that up? That doesn't seem to be the big issue here. And so lots of people I listened to this week have talked about, oh, this is Christian nationalism. Right? This is based in white Christian America. And for those who are not already convinced of that, it seems like you're alluding to something that's quite unseen or too abstract. It's tough to explain. But conspiracy theory is another one where for those of us who see it, it seems obvious. But to those who are under its spell, it remains invisible. You can't see it. So what do you think of this so far?
Yes, really good.
You like it so far?
Yeah. It's a desire to have simple explanations for complex issues.
Yes. Yeah.
Because all of those things that you mentioned, there are little elements of all of them.
That is true. Thank you for saying that. Right. Like if you weren't, so when you're talking to somebody who doesn't see the world the same way you do, and you allude to that, they'll say, look, I hear what you're saying, that there's an element to it. I just don't think it's the main thing, or that it's big enough to have triggered this. And of course, that's probably true. It's not big enough on its own to have triggered this. But that's why the perfect storm theory of crisis is important, is that it's always three components that converge or conflate to create, because you cannot have a crisis like this based on one element. Because if it was any one thing, you could combat it or deal with it or negotiate it. It takes an interlocking, complicated interaction to result in this level of crisis. And if it were one simple thing, it wouldn't have escalated to this. The only way you get to this level of crisis, and by the way, this is in marriage, this is in congregations, this is in school systems. The overlapping and interlocking theory of crisis says any one thing can't cause it to break down like this. In order for it to break down this badly, there had to have been multiple elements.
Like the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Like any marriage.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because when a marriage breaks down, right, or any relationship, you just think, but that last thing that you're so upset about, it seemed, maybe you're blowing it out of proportion. It didn't seem to be that bad, right? So
the cap on the toothpaste tube does not work through destroying marriage, right?
What's that?
The cap on the toothpaste.
Cap on the toothpaste, yeah.
But not putting the seat down is.
And so in our political environment, you would, so let's just say that Facebook and the conspiracy theories, and you think, well, if we got rid of Facebook, right, would that fix the problem? No. Well, what if we got rid of Fox News? No. Right? It's bigger than that. There's something else fueling this. All right, I'm going to go back to my presentation, but we can always come back to this. The reason I bring this up is that because I am sort of a translator, a migrator between worlds, I'm a dual citizen, I hear people in different camps using explanations of things that I think, people in this other group of friends I have, they wouldn't know what you're talking about, or they wouldn't agree with this thing that you're saying. So here's what I want to say, and this might be a little bit insulting, so I apologize, but just let me say this. If you see people on the other side of an issue as idiots who just need more information, I have bad news for you. You're a hamster. You're just on the other side of the same wheel. All right, let me say this again. If you see people on the other side of an issue as idiots who just need more or different information, you're a hamster. You're just on the other side of the same wheel. All right? Let me tell you how I got there. So for those in, let's say, science, right? And so evolution is one of those things that is not obvious to those who are not already converted. And so evolution is one of those really complicated theories that's very abstract. And if you don't already believe in it, it can be tough to be converted, right? But for those who are already believers in evolution, everything they seem, right, has confirmation built into it. And so this is where confirmation bias comes from. And so if you already believe in evolution, it can affect everything, including like psychology. So evolutionary psychology says, well, the reason, so now the tribalism that we're seeing in politics is a result of evolutionary psychology of us versus them, tribalism, right? But if you're not already a believer in evolution, that argument doesn't convince you. Does that make sense?
You see what you're looking for.
Yeah. So let's do another crisis in the abortion debate, right? So in that debate, the issue really comes down to, when does life start? So for those who think it starts at conception, or those who think that it should be when life is sustainable outside the womb, viability, or for those who believe it's right up until the point of birth, right? That debate, if you're not already convinced of that position, almost nothing can convince you to see it the other way. But to those of us who have already made up our minds on the issue, it seems obvious. Whatever it is that we have subscribed to, our view seems obvious to us, and we can't understand why others don't see it the same way, right? So let's say I'm a viability person, that if the fetus could survive outside the womb, then that's life, right? That's human life. So if I'm a viability person. But to those who are birth people, or those who are conception people, they can't see what I'm seeing, right? That argument isn't convincing to them. I'll use a third example. In the United Methodist, on the issue of same-sex marriage, we have this schism happening, and we're going to have a denominational split. We're right in the middle of it. And for those of us who are LGBTQ affirming, we just think, well, you're idiots. If you don't see it this way, then you're idiots. What can't you get about this? But who's really fascinating to me in this argument are those who agree with us about LGBTQ inclusion, but who voted against the change because of the Book of Discipline. They're so fascinating to me because they agree with us on the social issue, but they disagree with us on the religious issue. And for me, that was really eye-opening to try and enter into their world, because for those who are against same-sex marriage, I get where they're coming from. And to those like us who are for same-sex marriage, I get where we're coming from. But the crew that really challenged me are those who are pro-gay, but anti-changing the discipline. Because their argument is, what makes us Methodists is the Book of Discipline. And if we go against the Book of Discipline with anything we disagree with, then there's nothing that holds us together as Methodists. We might as well be non-denominational.
If we don't change the Book of Discipline, we don't evolve, and we're going to die anyway.
That's true. That's absolutely true. So their point was, yes, we want LGBTQ inclusion, but not at the price of division. So we want to change the discipline, and we won't perform same-sex marriages until the discipline is changed. You can't disobey the discipline and remain a Methodist. It's what makes us Methodists.
So it's an identity issue.
Identity, yes.
Well, and maybe they can eventually vote on it.
Right. Yeah, there are congregations that have gay people in leadership that voted against changing the discipline because they didn't want to split their congregation. They didn't want to lose any members.
I kind of had this discussion with Ray Balcom at an all-church meeting.
Okay.
I don't think I changed his mind, though.
Yeah.
So I don't know that we ever change minds from black to white.
Okay.
It's always kind of a slow progression from one area to another. You plant seeds along the way, and you internalize some things, and you go, oh, so then you move a little bit one way or another.
Okay.
Well,
But I do think there are life events that, on this particular topic, that can change things. I have read that exactly.
But here's what I want to say. The glitch for me is that when people change their mind, it's often in spite of how they read scripture or what they think the scripture says. And that's tricky, because if we just pick and choose what we don't want to believe, right? At some point somebody will say, but then that's not Christian. So the art or the beauty is to hold the positions that we do, not in spite of our tradition, but in honoring of that tradition. That's the difficulty.
And it's a question of authority, too.
Yes.
It's those who look at the discipline as the authority, which is investing the discipline with a level of sacredness that we hold with Scripture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, John, this is fantastic. So we've named, even in these contentious issues, right, in which there is crisis. In all of these things, there is crisis. We have named identity and authority as background issues that are fueling it. Right? So it's not just content. It's not just information. There's something else going on behind the scenes or underneath. Oh, by the way, I just want to acknowledge, hi, Bob. It's good to see you.
Nice to see you.
Okay, so we've done well up to this point, but here's where it's going to get a little contentious, okay? This brings us to politics. So what's funny is we're totally okay with talking about controversial issues like evolution, abortion, same-sex marriage. But here's where it's going to get a little tricky, all right? In what we saw this week, I want to propose to you that the thing going on behind the scenes, the unseen, I'm going to call it mechanisms. And so let me use two examples of this. When you have something as abstract as the Electoral College, there is an inherent difficulty to wrap your mind around the fact that it's not a popular vote, right? That the person who wins the popular vote, because of the way it gets portrayed to us, we say, well, 3 million more people voted for Hillary Clinton than Donald Trump. Except that that's irrelevant, because that's not how this system works. Anytime you have a mechanism like the Electoral College, you're going to have complications for those who can't comprehend it. And I would put myself in this category. The Electoral College leads me to be deeply suspicious that there are people pulling the strings behind the scenes, right? And so I'm admitting to you, I get why people are suspicious that the election was stolen. Now, I know that it's not, right? I get it. I have studied it enough, and I'm a convert. I've come to the other side. But I'm telling you, it wasn't that long ago that I could have been sold the idea that the election was stolen. Because when you have something as abstract and complex as an Electoral College, anytime you add in something like that, it's going to lead to the possibility of this kind of suspicion. All right, let me give you another one. With Citizens United, look, no one dislikes Washington more than I do. Okay? The people who stormed the Capitol this week, I get what they're angry about. I'm confessing this to you. And Dory, God bless you. When Dory says to vote, right? And that's like the most important thing we can do, right? As our civil responsibility. I have to tell you, every time she says vote, I say, then give me better candidates. Because right now, what it feels like to me is that people make a really big deal out of the difference between chocolate ice cream and strawberry ice cream, Republican and Democrat. but they're both ice cream. They're just two sides that are loyal to money you can't see, and lobbyists who we have no accountability with, and that our politicians are all crooks, because you cannot run for major office in this country without being funded by unseen money. An average person cannot run for senator. There is money fueling their candidacy and their run for office that I don't have access to. And anytime you have something that is unseen, like lobbyists and that kind of money, then they are loyal to something other than the constituency that votes for them. So while I was horrified just like everyone else at what happened this week, I am confessing to you, I sort of get how you could be whipped up into a frenzy. I actually get how you could distrust your government and what I'm calling the mechanisms by which an election comes to be certified. I actually understand how you could be whipped up into the kind of frenzy that we saw this week. How's that sit with you?
The overlying powers are greater.
Yeah, we live in the shadow of a Christian nation, Germany, being tricked and seduced by powerful forces, and that it's our job to stand up for right and to not let our country be taken over.
Although I have to say that I think that, well, never mind.
But that goes both ways too. I think you have those feelings on both sides.
I listened to a lot of podcasts. I watched a lot of news this week. I read as many things as I could find on what happened this week. And I heard a lot of people doing one of two things. Either in complete bafflement saying, how in the world could they be this duped or tricked or worked up into this frenzy? Just complete bewilderment, saying, I literally don't understand the other side. I don't get what they're thinking, right? They've been tricked or seduced or assigning them really bad motives. And that might be true, but there was a lot of that this week. There were also a lot of people saying, we just don't understand them enough, right? Like hillbilly elegy, right? Like if we just saw the world from their point of view, or right, something like that. And as I thought about restarting brainstorming this week and what we wanted to talk about, because there's no one I would rather debrief with than you all. I almost called an emergency session of brainstorming on Friday and said, we gotta talk. I was really thinking about when there is a crisis like this, how do we account for and attend to that unseen, the element in the other camp or the other side that we think they're seeing something or they believe something we don't have access to. There's something going on because I'm so baffled, I'm so disturbed, I'm so, horrified. There must be something else that I don't have access to. And so I thought I would just put in front of you my sort of thinking on how in the world this could have happened. So we have obviously a political crisis. There's no doubt about that. We also have a media crisis where we have these information silos and where we're getting entirely different streams of information. And then there's something else, right? We could even say that Trump played upon cynically, and that it like a Frankenstein, it got away from him, right? That even that morning he said, we're gonna walk down there and I'm gonna be with you, and right, that he was cynically whipping them up into a frenzy. But what was it exactly that he was playing? What's the note he was playing that was resonating with them? And I think it has to do with these unseen or invisible mechanisms that lead to suspicion that there is a nefarious work happening behind the scenes. And it's that suspicion that makes people vulnerable to these conspiracy theories. So Mary on the other stream says, what about grassroots movement? How much money was raised from average people? And I think that I think that's a wonderful point. If we keep doing what we've been doing, I don't know that it's going to get any better. In fact, I'm really afraid that this is, maybe we never come back from this, that it only gets worse, that the fracturing that we're seeing, that in the next 30 to 50 years only gets worse. That's a terrifying thought, right? So how do we reverse it? And I think that the grassroots is an important place to start, because working with our neighbors, in our neighborhoods, in our communities, is going to be the only practical way of us addressing this divide. Because if we all just continue to watch national news and focus on national issues, it's so large and so abstract that it's actually outsized from our ability to do anything practically about it. Right? I mean, this is one of the things that I think about all the time, is how much attention is placed on big national issues, when really the only place we have real influence and impact is in our backyard. So
this harkens back to Stephen Covey and the 7 habits of effective people. One of them was concentrate on your circle of influence, not the circle of concern.